Picture a, quote unquote, good classroom.
Right.
Rows of desks, total silence.
Right.
Every eye is just locked on the teacher at the front, and the only sound is like the scratching of pencils moving in perfect unison. For a lot of us, that looks like the ultimate perfect learning environment, right?
Oh, yeah. Completely.
But what if that absolute perfect silence is actually just the sound of intellectual hibernation?
It really is a comforting image for anyone trying to manage a large group of people because, well, total compliance mimics control.
Yeah, it looks like learning is happening.
Exactly. It looks productive. But the material we are diving into today completely shatters that illusion. We're drawing from a really fascinating collection of work by James Larison and Kelly Arrett.
And they're veteran educators, right?
They are. Over 2 decades of experience, heavily concentrated in diverse international schools. Their presentation scripts, their slides, and their book, which is called Voice, Choice, Rejoice. A manual for the democratic classroom, they argue that this silent compliance is actually feeding a massive engagement crisis.
So the core question they're trying to answer for you today is how to fundamentally shift the power dynamic in any learning environment.
Right.
We're talking about moving a room full of people from an autocracy of one, where the goal is just blind obedience, to a democracy of many, where the goal is, undeniable intrinsic engagement.
And to understand the sheer scale of that shift, we should look at a quote from Rudolf Dreikurs. He's largely considered a pioneer of democratic education.
Oh, right, the autocracy quote.
Yes. He posed a question in his work that really exposed the hypocrisy of traditional models. He asked, how can we expect students to function in a democracy when their only experience is living in an autocracy?
Wow. When you lay it out like that, it highlights a massive contradiction.
It really does.
We want people to grow up to be critical thinkers, to collaborate, to solve massive global problems. Yet the default plan is to spend their first 13 years dictating exactly when they are allowed to sit, when they can speak, and exactly what they should think.
We're actively programming people for compliance.
Exactly. And then we act shocked when they don't know how to contribute.
The sources are really blunt about the result of that programming, too. We're facing a severe engagement crisis, and it's characterized by this obsession with extrinsic rewards.
So like the classic, will this be on the test?
Yes, exactly. Or, do I get a gold star if I do this? It creates a highly transactional relationship with learning. Sir Ken Robinson famously described our current education system as a factory model.
Right.
It was engineered during the Industrial Revolution to produce compliant factory workers, functioning essentially as a command and control assembly line.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because anyone who has ever worked in a typical office can understand this dynamic instantly.
Oh, absolutely.
Being in a traditional autocratic classroom is mechanically identical to being intensely micromanaged at a corporate job. Your boss dictates your every move. They measure your output constantly with arbitrary metrics, and the natural human response isn't to work harder.
No, not at all.
The response is to watch the clock. You figure out the bare minimum required to not get fired, and you do exactly that. If you want people to actually care about the work, whether they're 8 years old or 48 years old, you cannot just command them. You have to drop the boss mantle and pick up the coach mantle.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the modern world is not looking for assembly line workers. The economy today demands what educators refer to as the 4 C's.
Which are?
Communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. Larison and Arrett make a crucial mechanical point here. You cannot teach collaboration through a solo worksheet.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And you can't teach critical thinking by having someone just memorize and regurgitate a list of dates. Those skills are muscles. They only develop when you let students wrestle with actual real-world problems together, which requires agency.
But if we're abandoning the factory model and, tearing down the idea of the teacher as the ultimate boss, there's a vacuum. We need a new framework for understanding what actually drives human behavior. We can't just command people anymore, so what are we supposed to do?
We have to look at what drives behavior from the inside out.
Yep.
The sources rely heavily on Dr. William Glasser's choice theory.
Okay.
Traditional models are built on behaviorism, the idea that you can control people from the outside in using carrots and sticks, rewards and punishments. Choice theory flips that entirely.
How so?
It posits that all behavior is chosen, and the only person who can actually control your behavior is you. According to Glasser, every choice we make is an attempt to satisfy 5 basic genetic human needs.
And those are?
Survival, love and belonging, power, freedom, and fun.
I am trying to visualize how that actually operates in real time. So it's almost like a car dashboard.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
Every single person is walking around with this internal dashboard of 5 warning lights. If you have a student in the back of the room who is endlessly tapping a pencil on their desk and disrupting a lesson, the traditional behaviorist approach says that kid is just acting out and needs a detention.
Right? Fix the behavior from the outside.
But choice theory says, wait, look at the dashboard. That student's fun or freedom light is flashing bright red, and they are choosing a behavior to try and fulfill that need.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. And the friction occurs because that student's attempt to fulfill their fun need by tapping the pencil is directly clashing with another student's power need.
Power need.
Yeah, their need to feel competent and focused while trying to concentrate on the lesson.
So why doesn't a traditional punishment work there? If the teacher just yells at the kid to stop tapping the pencil, doesn't that solve the clash?
Temporarily, maybe, but mechanically, punishment usually backfires. If you yell at a student, you are actively suppressing their need for power and belonging.
Because you're asserting dominance over them.
Exactly. When a human being feels powerless, they don't just accept it. They will inevitably attempt to gain power over others, often through deeper rebellion or disruption. The warning light on the dashboard doesn't turn off just because you yelled at it. The genius of a democratic classroom is that it doesn't fight these needs. It's designed to meet them through the curriculum. You give students legitimate agency over their learning, which satisfies their need for power and freedom productively.
But wait, if every person in the room is a walking dashboard of 5 competing needs, how on earth does one teacher manage 30 different dashboards without just completely losing their mind? That sounds like absolute chaos.
That is where another concept from Glasser comes into play, which the sources call the quality world. To manage those needs, you have to understand the specific, unique landscape of each student's mind.
The quality world is described essentially as the world according to you.
Exactly.
It's this internal, deeply personal space where you store the things you like, the people you care about most, and the things you feel you are genuinely good at. It's your ideal reality.
And here is the mechanical shift for the educator. You cannot forcefully cram information into a student's brain if you are not in their quality world.
Oh.
A teacher's primary job is to establish such a positive, authentic relationship that the student is persuaded to willingly add the teacher to their quality world. Once the teacher is in, the student is much more likely to invite the subject matter in as well.
There is a fantastic anecdote in the materials that demonstrates what happens when a student actively chooses to add a subject to their quality world.
The Molly story.
Yes, it's about a 5th grader named Molly. Because she was in a democratic classroom, the teacher didn't just assign a rigid topic. Molly was given the agency to choose what she wanted to pursue. She chose World War II.
Okay.
She took total ownership of it, researched it obsessively, and shared her findings with the class. Fast forward 12 years, the teacher ran into Molly's mother. It turns out Molly had just graduated college as a history major.
That is incredible.
That isn't just a cute story. That's the life-altering trajectory of giving a student ownership instead of just a mandate.
It perfectly illustrates the enduring power of intrinsic motivation. However, acknowledging the psychology behind the quality world and those 5 basic needs is the abstract part.
Right, that's the theory.
The sources recognize that the physical logistics of running a room this way is where the real challenge lies. How do you actually grant students this level of power without the environment devolving into Lord of the Flies?
Right, because democracy is inherently messy. It requires friction. But Larison and Arrett lay out the actual physical mechanics of how to run this system, and it is built on 3 pillars: voice, choice, and rejoice. Let's break down voice first.
Sounds good.
The primary mechanism for giving students a voice is the class meeting. But it's not just calling a meeting. The physical layout matters.
Now, logistics are highly intentional. During a class meeting, students do not sit at their desks in rows. They physically move to sit in a circle, usually on a carpet.
Why a circle?
The reason is mechanical. Eye contact. In rows, you're looking at the back of someone's head, which isolates you. A circle forces full-body listening and flattens the hierarchy.
That makes sense.
The class uses a physical agenda notebook that sits out in the open all day. If any student has an issue, a frustration, or an idea, they write it in the notebook. During the meeting, the class discusses those specific agenda items.
And what is the teacher doing during this?
The teacher acts purely as a secretary and a coach. They do not dictate the flow of the conversation or hand down verdicts. They facilitate, ensuring that everyone uses names and speaks respectfully, but the students drive the dialogue.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. What happens when a student uses that notebook to ask for something the teacher absolutely despises?
Oh, this happens all the time.
There's a story in the text about a student named Kim. She writes in the agenda notebook that she wants the class to be allowed to keep water bottles on their desks. Now, the teacher internally hates this idea. They are picturing spills, distractions, and a logistical nightmare.
The classic teacher dread.
Exactly. The traditional autocratic response is simple. No, my room, my rules. But in the democratic classroom, Kim gets the floor. She presents her idea, and the class discusses it.
And what does the teacher do?
The teacher realizes that crushing the idea destroys trust. The engagement and the sense of power the students gain by having their voice heard is vastly more important than the risk of a spilled water bottle. So they try it out.
It is a perfect demonstration of shared decision-making, which brings us directly to the second pillar choice. When a class makes a decision together, like the water bottle policy, they do not use traditional voting. They use consensus.
Wait, I have to push back on that. You're telling me a teacher is supposed to get 30 elementary school kids to reach total consensus on an issue? That sounds like a recipe for a 3-hour argument where nothing gets done. Why not just vote? Majority rules is the definition of democracy for most of us.
It is the standard definition. But think about the mechanics of a simple majority vote in a closed environment like a classroom. If 51% vote for an idea, 49% of the room is sitting there feeling entirely defeated.
Oh, I see.
They lost. Their basic need for power is crushed, and their need for belonging is threatened because they are now in the out group. This breeds immediate resentment.
Right.
Consensus in this framework isn't about everyone getting exactly what they want. It is about dialogue, extreme flexibility, and finding a solution that every single person in the room can at least support and live with, even if it requires compromise.
So it prevents the creation of factions within the classroom.
Yeah.
There's a great example of this consensus-building process in the sources. A school handed down a mandate for a holiday door decorating contest. It was a top-down, required activity. The teacher hated the idea of turning a holiday activity into a competition between classrooms. But instead of dictating a design to get it over with, they used it to practice consensus. The students spent serious time dialoguing, listening to conflicting ideas, and eventually agreeing on a unified design for an elaborate snowman door.
And did they win the contest?
They didn't. They lost the school-wide contest. But because the decision-making was entirely shared, because every single student had a voice and a choice in that design, the students truly believed they had the best door in the entire school.
That's amazing.
The external validation of winning didn't matter because their internal basic needs for belonging, power, and fun were completely fulfilled by the process itself.
It proves that the process builds the community, not the final product. But we have to address the reality of a room full of people constantly collaborating and making choices. Conflict is inevitable.
Absolutely.
If the teacher is refusing to act as the authoritarian punisher, how do you protect the environment when things go wrong?
The sources outline a very rigid structure to handle this, beginning with how students are grouped. They use what are called cooperative base groups. These are intentionally mixed groups of 3.
3 is a very specific number. 2 is a partnership, which can easily gridlock if they disagree.
And 4.
4 allows a quieter student to hide and let the others do the work. 3 is mathematically the sweet spot for forcing active problem solving. And they keep these groups together for 4 to 6 weeks, so they are forced to move through the awkward stages of group development.
They don't just throw them together either. They are actively coached on physical social skills. They practice using 12-inch voices, meaning you learn to modulate your volume so only the people within 12 inches of you can hear you.
Love, though.
They physically practice leaning in and maintaining eye contact. But even with all that coaching, a fight is going to happen. Someone is going to grab a pencil or insult an idea. When that happens, the classroom utilizes a tool called the peace table.
The peace table is the cornerstone of conflict resolution in this model. It is a highly structured 5-step process that gives students the scaffolding to independently talk it out without the teacher playing judge and jury.
Let's actually walk through how that works mechanically because it is fascinating. Step 1 is simply cooling off and agreeing to talk.
Right. You can't resolve a conflict if someone's adrenaline is still spiking.
Step 2 is where they share their feelings, but they are strictly trained to use I statements instead of you statements.
That distinction is entirely neurological. If a student sits down and says, "You ruined my project and you're a jerk," they are using an accusatory you statement.
which just makes the other person defensive.
Mechanically, that triggers the amygdala in the other student's brain. It initiates a fight-or-flight threat response. The accused student instantly becomes defensive, and logic shuts down.
Makes sense.
An I statement bypasses that threat response. A student says, "I feel incredibly frustrated when my project gets damaged because I worked really hard on it." It focuses on the internal experience, which keeps the other person out of a defensive posture so they can actually process the grievance.
That makes so much sense. After they share their feelings, step 3 is restating what the other person just said to prove they actually heard it.
Active listening.
Exactly. Step 4 is brainstorming possible solutions together, and step 5 is agreeing on one solution and physically shaking on it. And this entire democratic process is protected by what the sources call the 3 Ps.
The bottom lines.
These are the absolute non-negotiable bottom lines of the environment. No put-downs, no physically hurting others, and no property damage. If you cross those lines, the environment is no longer safe for democracy.
What's fascinating here is how the teacher responds when one of those bottom lines is crossed. It is a complete departure from traditional discipline and leans heavily into restorative justice, or what the text calls restitution.
How is it different?
Well, if a student breaks a rule in a traditional model, the mechanic is punishment, detention, suspension, standing in the hall. That isolates the student, builds deep resentment, and completely starves their need for belonging and power. It virtually guarantees they will act out again to reclaim it.
Right, you are just treating the symptom and actively making the underlying disease worse.
Exactly. Restitution uses a 30-second intervention. It is a non-punitive, highly targeted conversation. The teacher asks the student to reflect on their choices. What need are you trying to meet right now? Is this behavior actually helping you meet it? Let's make a plan to fix this mistake and repair the harm.
Wow, so it's a completely different vocabulary.
The entire goal is to replace what Glasser calls the 7 deadly habits of relationships: blaming, criticizing, punishing, and complaining, with the 7 caring habits, which are supporting, encouraging, listening, and trusting.
It is entirely focused on repairing the community rather than just exacting a toll for a mistake. So we have voice, which is facilitated by the class meeting and the agenda notebook. We have choice, which relies on consensus and cooperative groups.
Yes.
When those 2 pillars are actively protected by the peace table and restorative conflict resolution, the natural byproduct is the 3rd pillar, rejoice. Rejoice is a community that actively celebrates growth and is deeply, intrinsically motivated.
And this isn't just a vague feeling. It is built systematically. One of the primary tools for building Rejoice is the compliment circle.
Oh, I really like this part.
Typically on a Friday, the entire class sits in that circle facing each other, and they go around delivering positive feedback to their peers. But the rule is that it cannot be vague praise. You can't just say, "You're a cool person." It must be clear and highly specific.
Like saying, "Sarah, I saw you helping David pack up his backpack when he was rushing to catch the bus."
Precisely. And neurologically, receiving that kind of granular specific feedback directly from a peer fulfills both the love and belonging need and the power need.
Because it's real.
Exactly. The student feels seen, they feel valued by their community, and they leave the environment feeling genuinely powerful.
So what does this all mean? When you put all of these mechanisms together, choice theory, the quality world, the class meetings, the peace table, and the compliment circles, what is the actual tangible result?
It leads to a pretty incredible outcome.
There is an anecdote in the text that captures the end goal perfectly. A mother approached a teacher, sounding exasperated, and said, "I have a problem. Last night, long after bedtime, I caught my daughter under the covers with a flashlight, sneaking in some reading."
The classic flashlight under the covers.
It really is. And the teacher just smiled and told her, "That isn't a problem. That is a massive celebration. Your child has fallen in love with reading."
Yeah.
That is the pot of gold at the end of the democratic classroom rainbow.
It really is.
That student isn't hiding under the covers reading because there is a pop quiz the next morning. She isn't doing it to get a sticker on a chart. She is reading because she has actively added that subject to her quality world. Her internal dashboard lights for fun, freedom, and power are glowing bright green.
It's funny to think about the flashlight under the covers, but we have to recognize that this is the exact same psychological mechanism as an adult employee staying up late to tinker with a project they genuinely care about.
That is so true.
They aren't doing it for the boss. They're doing it because the work itself is in their quality world. Moving an environment from a compliant autocracy to an engaged democracy requires intentional architecture. You have to drop the boss mentality and become a coach.
Because these are not just cute classroom management tools for elementary school kids.
Not at all. Glasser's 5 basic needs: survival, love and belonging, power, freedom, and fun do not disappear the moment you turn 18. Whether you are trying to manage a corporate team, whether you are trying to navigate a serious conflict with your spouse using I statements, or whether you are just trying to understand your own frustrating habits, these principles are universally applicable.
They are the fundamental mechanics of human connection. When you understand the dashboard, you stop fighting the warning lights and start actually fixing the engine.
This raises an important question, and it is the thought we want to leave you with today. In our schools, in our corporate workplaces, and even in our homes, we expend a massive amount of energy trying to enforce order and compliance.
Too much energy, probably.
But what if we completely shifted our metrics? What if we stopped measuring the success of our children, our employees, and ourselves by how quietly and obediently we follow the rules, and started measuring our success by how creatively and collaboratively we are able to rewrite those rules together?
Because at the end of the day, a room full of perfect, absolute silence might look like a roaring success to an autocrat. But if we want a world full of engaged, passionate people who can actually solve problems, we have to remember that sometimes silence is just intellectual hibernation. We have to be willing to wake them up. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.